A butcher knife in one hand, a phone in the other. Sandra Harold is screaming into the receiver while the animal she raised from infancy tears her closest friend apart 3 feet away, and no matter how many times she drives the blade in, he will not stop. That moment is real. It happened in a quiet Connecticut driveway in 2009, and it's the last of 5 true stories you're about to hear. 5 people who spent years, sometimes decades, building a bond with an animal most of us would never get within 100 feet of. A cassowary, a python, a tiger, a bear, a chimpanzee raised like a child. Every one of these people believed the relationship protected them. Every one of them was wrong, and the moment they found that out, there was no taking it back. April 12, 2019. A farm outside Alachua, Florida, thick with heat and the low calls of exotic birds most neighbors couldn't name. Marvin Hajos was 75 years old, and by then he'd spent years quietly assembling one of the largest private exotic animal collections in the region, close to 100 creatures, from lemurs to birds most people only see behind zoo glass. 2 of them were cassowaries. Under Florida law, cassowaries sit in Class 2, the same danger tier as alligators and clouded leopards, animals that require experience to keep, but because Hajos was breeding them rather than showing them to the public, he didn't need a permit at all. That gap in the rules mattered more than anyone realized. A cassowary looks almost prehistoric, a flightless bird standing 6 feet tall, glossy black feathers, a bright blue neck, and on the inside toe of each foot, a claw shaped like a dagger, up to 4 inches long. It can run over 30 miles an hour and clear nearly 7 feet in a single jump. Wildlife officials have called it, without exaggeration, the most dangerous bird alive. That Friday morning, Hajos was near the enclosure, doing what witnesses would later describe as ordinary farm work. At some point, he fell. Nobody saw exactly how. What's certain is that the fall put him within reach of the bird, and the cassowary reacted the way its body is built to react to anything on the ground and vulnerable. The autopsy would later show more than a dozen lacerations, his face, neck, back, thighs, and 1 wound to his right arm deep enough to sever the brachial artery, the major vessel supplying blood to the limb. In the 911 call, Hajos is heard trying to give his own address between breaths, asking almost politely for an ambulance to hurry. First responders got him to a hospital, but the blood loss was already too severe. He was pronounced dead within hours. Investigators called it a tragic accident, not a crime. Nobody had broken a law, because for this particular bird, in this particular use, there wasn't one to break. His family later said he was doing exactly what he loved when it happened. Weeks afterward, in keeping with his own wishes, the cassowary was sold at a livestock auction along with the rest of his collection. No new state restrictions followed. The loophole that let a bird capable of killing a grown man live in an unpermitted backyard enclosure is still there today. But regulation gaps weren't the only blind spot in these stories. 3 years before Hajos fell, in a quiet English bedroom, another lifelong animal keeper was about to learn that 16 years of trust meant nothing to an 8-foot python. Basingstoke, Hampshire, late August, 2017. Daniel Brandon was 31, and he had kept snakes since he was a teenager. By the time of his death, 10 of them shared his bedroom in his family's home, alongside a dozen tarantulas. Among the snakes was an African rock python named Tiny, an 8-foot female he'd raised from the time she was small enough to sit in his palm. He called her his baby. His mother would later say he never once felt threatened by her, even though he understood exactly how strong she was. She'd occasionally strike out defensively if someone unfamiliar walked into the room, and he'd simply learn to read around it. That night, his mother heard a single thud from his bedroom. She assumed it was something falling, a weight, a piece of furniture, and didn't check right away. When she finally went in, she found her son unconscious on the floor. Tiny was nearby, uncoiled, slipping out from beneath a cabinet. African rock pythons kill the way every constrictor does, a fast strike to anchor their backward-curving teeth into flesh, followed almost instantly by coils thrown around the body, tightening with each exhale the victim takes until there's no room left to inhale at all. It isn't the crushing people imagine, it's suffocation, and in a large snake it can take well under a minute to become unsurvivable. The coroner, Andrew Bradley, ruled it death by misadventure, saying there was no doubt Brandon's death came as a direct result of contact with Tiny, though he admitted nobody could say exactly how the encounter began, whether she struck first or wrapped around him mid-movement, or reacted to something as small as him tripping near her enclosure. Not everyone accepted the ruling quietly. The chairman of the Federation of British Herpetologists publicly questioned whether a snake that size could really overpower a grown man alone, calling the verdict something he remained skeptical of. But the physical evidence, asphyxiation, a body found beside an uncoiled 8-foot constrictor in a room with no other explanation, left the coroner unmoved. What both cases share is a kind of practiced comfort that stops registering as risk. Hajos had walked past his cassowary's enclosure hundreds of times. Brandon had let Tiny loose in his room more times than his mother could count. But comfort with an animal's danger isn't the same as control over it, and nowhere was that gap more publicly proven than with a man who fought all the way to Canada's highest court for the right to prove it wrong. Southwold, Ontario. January 2010. Norman Buwalda wasn't a casual hobbyist. He was, by his own local reputation, the face of exotic animal ownership in Canada. He kept 2 tigers, 2 lions, and a cougar on his rural property, and when his township tried to ban exotic animals on private land, he didn't back down. He fought the bylaw for 2 years and took it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and won. That legal fight had started after a 2004 incident on his own land, when a 10-year-old boy was mauled while being photographed with one of Buwalda's tigers on a leash, suffering severe injuries to his neck and head. Buwalda faced no charges. He was, after all, legally entitled to own the animal. Neighbors who knew him described a man who trusted animals more than people, who genuinely believed, after everything, that his tigers wouldn't hurt anyone. In January 2010, Buwalda entered the enclosure of one of his tigers, a male weighing close to 650 pounds, to feed it, the same task he'd done countless times before. Nobody witnessed what happened next. A family member found him a short time later, already gone, and had the presence of mind to lock the tiger into a separate section of the enclosure before calling for help. Ontario Provincial Police could only piece together the outcome, not the sequence. The tiger had attacked him and killed him. Inside the cage he'd spent 2 years and a Supreme Court case defending his right to enter. There was no prosecution, no ruling to appeal. The same legal victory that let him keep the tiger meant there was, by definition, no one left to hold accountable. His case became one of the clearest illustrations in Canadian legal history of a truth that keeps repeating across species and continents. Winning the right to keep a dangerous animal is not the same as being safe around one. And the risk in that equation doesn't only fall on the owner. Sometimes it falls on the person hired to do the feeding. Columbia Station, Ohio. August 2010. Sam Mazzola ran one of the more notorious private exotic animal operations in the country. Bears, wolves, and reportedly big cats, all kept on a single rural property. Years earlier, Mazzola had made headlines for offering the public the chance to wrestle his bears for money, a practice that drew sustained backlash from animal welfare groups and eventually cost him his exhibition license. But losing that license didn't mean losing the animals. Ohio, at the time, had no law preventing a private individual from simply keeping bears, wolves, and big cats on their own land, so Mazzola kept them. Brent Kandra was 24, working as a caretaker on the property, responsible for the routine, unglamorous work that keeps an operation like that running. Feeding schedules, enclosure checks, the kind of task done so often it stops feeling dangerous. One evening that August, Kandra opened the enclosure of one of the bears, not one used for the old wrestling shows, to feed it, the same way he had many times before. Something went wrong in that opening. The bear attacked him, and the mauling was fatal. Investigators ruled it a workplace accident. The bear was euthanized. No criminal charges followed, because, as with Buwalda's tiger and Hajos's cassowary, there was no law being broken. Kandra's death is a reminder that these stories aren't only about owners underestimating an animal they love. Sometimes the person paying the price is someone else entirely, an employee who inherited the risk without ever choosing the animal, doing a job that had simply never gone wrong before, until the one time it did. Every case so far ends the same administrative way: a ruling, no charges, an animal put down or relocated, life going on for everyone except the person at the center of it. But the 5th case doesn't end there. It's the one where the damage didn't stop with a single death. It spread to a second one, months later, and it started with a decision that felt, at the time, completely ordinary. Stamford, Connecticut. February 16, 2009. Sandra Harold had raised a chimpanzee named Travis since he was a baby, after her own daughter and husband had both died in the years before. By every account from people who knew her, Travis wasn't a pet to her. He was what was left of her family. He'd grown up appearing in television commercials, riding in the front seat of her car, sleeping in her house, and by 2009 he weighed roughly 200 pounds, with a raw physical strength that comes standard in an adult male chimpanzee, strength that in the wild lets them tear apart other primates without much effort. That week, Travis had been sick, being treated with medication for Lyme disease, on top of what neighbors would later describe as an anxious, off pattern of behavior. That Monday, he got out of Harold's car in the driveway and wouldn't come back in. Harold called her friend Charla Nash, who lived nearby and had helped with Travis before, and asked her to come over. She thought a second familiar face might calm him down, the way it always had in the past. It didn't. When Nash got out of her car, Travis attacked her immediately, and the mauling that followed was catastrophic. Her hands, her nose, her lips, her eyelids, gone within moments, in an assault so severe that a friend who arrived afterward could barely process what she was looking at. Harold tried everything a person can try against 200 pounds of enraged muscle. She grabbed a butcher knife and stabbed him repeatedly. She beat him with whatever she could reach, screaming at him the entire time to stop, and none of it worked, because Travis wasn't reacting to her at all anymore. When police arrived, Travis turned on them too, cornering an officer inside his own patrol car, and the officer shot him in self-defense. Wounded, Travis retreated into the house, back to the living quarters he'd shared with Harold for 15 years, and died there alone. Charla Nash survived, barely. She spent months in critical condition, was later evaluated as a candidate for a face and hand transplant, and would spend the rest of her life living with what that one encounter took from her. Sandra Harold spent the following year living with what she'd done and what she hadn't been able to stop. She'd already lost her only child and her husband before Travis. Now she'd lost him too, in the worst way imaginable, and watched her best friend suffer for it in a way she could never undo. In May 2010, a little over a year later, Harold died of a ruptured aortic aneurysm. Her lawyer would later say plainly that her heart, broken so many times already, simply couldn't carry one more loss. She was 72. 5 different animals. 5 different countries and decades. But underneath all of it is the same quiet miscalculation, repeated every time. The belief that enough years, enough affection, enough familiarity can rewrite what an animal fundamentally is. It can't. A cassowary doesn't stop having a killing claw because it was hand-raised. A python doesn't stop being a constrictor because it's called someone's baby. A tiger, a bear, a chimpanzee raised like a son. None of them trade their instincts for love, no matter how real that love is on the human side of the fence. In every one of these 5 cases, the animal wasn't acting out of malice. It was acting exactly the way its species has always acted. In the one moment the safety net of routine finally failed. The people who died believed they'd built something different with their animal. What actually protected them for years was luck, and luck eventually runs out. If this kind of story stays with you, there are more like it worth understanding, not for the shock, but for what they keep teaching us about the line between connection and control.